My brothers and sisters, my heart is heavy tonight, heavier than it has ever been in all the battles I have fought, heavier than in all the storms I have faced as a soldier, heavier than in the weight of carrying the destiny of my people. Last night, when I received the news, I felt as though my chest collapsed. I sat in silence, unable to move, unable to breathe, and I whispered to myself, not him, not Judge Frank Caprio. The sad demise of this great man broke me into tears. Tears I could not hold back, tears that still flow as I speak to you. I, Ibrahim Traoré, the man who has been hardened by war, who has stood against empires and their machines of domination, was reduced to a grieving child because I lost not just a man, not just a judge, but a fatherly figure for all humanity. Judge Frank Caprio was more than a judge. He was a mirror to humanity's soul. He stood in a courtroom, but what he dispensed was not just justice according to law. He dispensed mercy, compassion, understanding, humanity. He taught us that true justice does not come from cold interpretation of words written on papers, but from a heart that understands human struggle, from a soul that can see the pain of others, and from a conscience that does not ignore the suffering of the weak. When I first heard of his work, I asked myself, is this man truly a judge in America, in a system known for harshness and cruelty? And yet he was there, day after day, showing that justice could be kind, that justice could have a face that smiles, a hand that comforts, and a heart that heals. What pains me, brothers and sisters, is that men like him are rare. They are treasures in deserts of injustice. In a world where too often the scales of justice are tipped by wealth, by influence, by race, and by the invisible strings of power, Judge Frank Caprio stood like an oasis in that desert. He was not a mirage, he was real. He was a man of flesh and blood who chose to live differently, to judge differently, to embody justice in a way that restored faith in humanity itself. Judge Caprio did not care about the color of your skin. He did not look at you and see black or white, privileged or marginalized. He saw human beings. He saw your story, your struggle, your truth. In his courtroom, there was no hierarchy of worth. To him, whether you were the descendant of kings or the child of immigrants, whether your ancestors came on ships chained or free, your dignity was equal in his eyes. That, my brothers and sisters, is the essence of true justice, the courage to treat people as human beings, not as labels, not as stereotypes, not as statistics. He did not care whether you were rich or poor. Too many times in our world, justice bends toward the wealthy, while the poor are crushed beneath its weight. We know this pain all too well in Africa, where the weak are made weaker and the strong grow stronger. But Judge Caprio refused to bow to such injustice. In his courtroom, the poor mother trying to feed her children was not scorned. She was not humiliated. She was not treated as though her poverty was a crime. Instead, she was given respect. She was given compassion. She was given a chance. And the wealthy businessman, though he might carry the air of confidence and entitlement, received no special favor, no undue advantage. In that small courtroom, there was a balance that the wider world often fails to uphold. He did not care about your status, your class, your religion. These things, which so often divide men, meant nothing to him. A man in tattered clothes could stand before him and be heard just as attentively as a man in an expensive suit. A woman covering her head in prayer, a man carrying his Bible, another professing no faith at all were treated with equal humanity. Brothers and sisters, do you realize how revolutionary that is in a world that thrives on division? In societies where people are so quickly judged by the accent of their voice, the name on their birth certificate, or the color of their passport, he looked beyond the surface and saw the person. To him, a black man and a white man stood as equals. These are not just words. This was his practice, and that is why he was loved. Because equality, when it exists only in law books, is useless. But when equality breathes in the daily decisions of those who hold power, it transforms lives. Judge Caprio gave life to equality, not in grand speeches, but in small, consistent acts. And those small acts of fairness accumulated into something monumental, a legacy of hope. To him, a struggling immigrant mother and a wealthy businessman both deserve to be listened to with the same respect. Think about this carefully, my brothers and sisters. Respect is the foundation of justice. You cannot deliver justice if you cannot listen, and you cannot listen if you do not respect. In his courtroom, respect was not bought with money, nor inherited with lineage. It was given freely to all, because all were human. That struggling mother, who carried the weight of feeding her children while fearing the law, walked into his courtroom trembling. But she left with her dignity intact, sometimes even with tears of relief. Why? Because she was not treated as a number in a file, but as a mother with a heart, as a woman with worth, as a human being whose struggles mattered. And yes, even the wealthy businessman received respect, not because of his wealth, but because Judge Caprio understood that respect cannot be selective. If it is real, it must be universal. That is what made him unique, his consistency, his refusal to discriminate in any direction, his belief that the law should serve all, not some. To him, the tears of a child who watched his parent fined unjustly carried more weight than the cold figures written on tickets. My brothers and sisters, let me pause here. This is the heart of Judge Caprio's greatness, because in most courtrooms, the fine is all that matters, the number on the paper, the punishment imposed. But in his courtroom, humanity mattered more. He saw the tears of a child and understood that those tears are worth more than dollars, more than legal codes, more than rigid enforcement. He understood that those tears could shape how that child would grow to view justice, how that child would grow to view authority, how that child would grow to view humanity itself. And so he chose mercy. He chose to heal instead of harm, to encourage instead of crush, to teach instead of condemn. Those tears of a child were not invisible to him, as they are to so many. They were sacred, and he showed us that justice, when blind to humanity, is not justice at all. It is cruelty dressed in legal robes. He showed that a judge could be a servant not of power but of humanity. This is what makes him unforgettable. Too often, judges see themselves as masters of the courtroom, distant, untouchable, feared. But Judge Caprio was a servant. He did not sit above people, he sat among them. He listened, he smiled, he comforted. He used his authority not to elevate himself, but to uplift others. And by doing so, he redefined what it means to be a judge. He showed the world that compassion is not weakness. He showed the world that mercy is not the opposite of justice, but its completion. He showed that when you temper the law with humanity, you do not destroy justice, you perfect it. And in doing this, he left behind a legacy more powerful than any court ruling, more enduring than any legal precedent. He left behind a vision of what justice should be and what humanity can become. So when I say that men like him are rare, understand me fully. I do not mean rare in numbers only. I mean rare in courage, rare in humility, rare in love, because it takes courage to stand against a system that demands harshness. It takes humility to look at the poor and not see yourself as superior. It takes love to give respect to those whom the world disrespects. That is why he was a treasure. Now, am I somehow cynical to assume that those whom the world disrespects, that is why he was a treasure in deserts of injustice, a light in places darkened by cruelty, a voice of humanity in halls often filled with indifference. And that is why we mourn him so deeply, because we know that when such treasures are lost, the world feels poorer, and yet his example remains, shining for those who are willing to see. His courtroom may now be silent, but his spirit speaks still. It speaks to judges in distant lands, telling them that they too can be compassionate. It speaks to leaders across nations, reminding them that true power is service. It speaks to ordinary people like you and me, urging us to treat one another with the dignity we all deserve. This, brothers and sisters, is why Judge Frank Caprio will never truly die. Because his compassion has been sown into the hearts of millions, and seeds of compassion once planted cannot be uprooted. They will grow, they will spread, they will bear fruit in generations to come. Last night, when the news came, I could not sleep. My body was tired, but my spirit was restless. I closed my eyes, but all I saw was his face. I tried to silence my thoughts, but they screamed louder. I lay there in the darkness, and in that silence, his voice echoed in my mind. The calm voice, the warm voice, the voice that brought comfort to so many who stood trembling in his courtroom. And I realized that a man who never judged with coldness, a man who chose kindness over cruelty, had left us. It replayed his moments in my mind like a film that refused to end. I saw him seated in that familiar chair, not with arrogance, not with harshness, but with the gentleness of a father. I saw how he would lean forward, how his eyes softened when someone stood before him, afraid of what would come next. And I remembered the countless times he let people go, not because the law demanded it, but because humanity demanded it. Not because of heat, but because terrorism is what people do. Think of the millions he lost, not because he didn't know his own, but because humanity demanded it. That was his greatness. He understood that the law without compassion is a weapon, but the law with compassion is a healing balm. I remember the stories of single mothers struggling to pay rent, struggling to feed their children, who walked into his courtroom as if carrying the weight of the world. Their hands trembled, their voices cracked, their eyes filled with worry. They feared that one more fine, one more punishment would crush them completely. And yet there he was, smiling gently at them, not mocking them, not dismissing them, but smiling with the kindness of someone who truly understood. He listened, not with impatience, but with full attention. He heard the unspoken words in their silence, the exhaustion in their sighs, the desperation in their tears, and instead of punishing, he relieved their burden. He told them in his own way, "You are seen, you are heard, you are valued." Think, my brothers and sisters, of the impact of that moment. For those women, justice was not just a fine canceled, it was dignity restored. It was the feeling that society had not completely abandoned them. It was the reassurance that their struggle was not invisible. For a mother fighting day and night just to feed her children, such compassion is more precious than gold. Judge Caprio gave that compassion freely, and in doing so, he gave them strength to carry on another day. I remembered also the young men, often black men, who stood before him with fines they could not afford. They entered his courtroom expecting the worst. They carried the history of a system that had always been harsh with them. They carried the weight of stereotypes that saw them as troublemakers before they even opened their mouths. They carried the scars of a world that punishes the poor for being poor, that punishes the marginalized for daring to survive. And yet, in Judge Caprio's courtroom, something different happened. Instead of adding more chains to their necks, he gave them hope. He did not look at them and see criminals. He looked at them and saw young men with potential, young men with a future still unwritten, young men who needed a chance, not another burden. With his words, with his gestures, with his decisions, he said to them, "I believe in you." And my brothers and sisters, when the world tells you every day that you are worthless, that you are destined to fail, to hear someone say, "I believe in you," is enough to change the course of your life. He gave them encouragement. He reminded them that a mistake does not define a man, that poverty is not a crime, that youth is not permanent failure. He gave them the chance to rise again, and that chance was sometimes all they needed. How many of those young men walked out of his courtroom with their heads a little higher, their hearts a little lighter, their future a little brighter? How many of them chose a better path because one man in one courtroom decided not to crush them, but to lift them? We may never know the numbers. We may never know how many lives he saved from falling into despair. We may never know how many souls he rescued from drowning in shame. But what I know, deep in my heart, is that they are countless. Because when a man like Judge Caprio sits on the bench, his influence does not stop at the walls of the courtroom. It travels beyond. It follows those people into their homes, into their neighborhoods, into their children's lives. It shapes how they see the world and how the world sees them. Think of the child who sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, watching his father or mother stand before the judge, fearing humiliation, fearing punishment. Think of that child watching as Judge Caprio smiled at their parent, spoke kindly, showed understanding, and gave relief. That child did not just see a judge. They saw justice with a human face. and that memory will never leave them. That child will grow up knowing that not all authority is cruel, not all judges are merciless, not all systems are broken. That child will carry with them the seed of hope planted in that moment, and perhaps one day they too will show compassion because they once saw it given to their family. This is the ripple effect of mercy. It spreads far beyond what we can measure, and that is why Judge Caprio's legacy is so powerful. He was not just ruling on cases, he was shaping lives, shaping generations. He was teaching us all that kindness in power is not weakness, it is the highest strength. Brothers and sisters, I want you to imagine the alternative. Imagine if those mothers had been fined, if those young men had been condemned, if those children had seen cruelty instead of compassion. Imagine the bitterness that would have been sown, the despair that would have spread, the anger that would have grown. That is what happens in most courtrooms, and that is why the world is filled with so much pain. But because Judge Caprio chose differently, because he chose humanity, he broke that cycle again and again. And so, when I think of his passing, I cannot help but weep, because the world has lost a rare man. A man who proved that justice does not have to be blind to human suffering, that mercy does not weaken the law but strengthens it, that kindness does not undermine authority but dignifies it. Last night, I could not sleep because I knew that with his passing, a voice of compassion was silenced. But I also knew that the echoes of that voice will remain forever in the hearts of those he touched. And so I wept. I wept not just for myself, but for humanity, because when men like him depart this world, we feel a void that cannot easily be filled. In a time where judges sit cold, distant, ready to condemn without blinking, he was warm, approachable, and human. In a time where justice often bows before power, he stood upright, unshaken, fearless, rooted in fairness. In a world where too many choose cruelty over compassion, he chose compassion every time. My brothers and sisters, I want you to feel my heart tonight. I am not standing before you as a president, nor as a soldier, nor as a revolutionary. Tonight, I am simply a grieving man, mourning another man who inspired me deeply. When I speak of Africa's liberation, when I speak of justice for my people, I know that justice cannot exist without compassion. And Judge Caprio, though oceans away, though in a different land, showed us all what that compassion looks like in action. There is something powerful in his story that I must share. Judge Caprius grew up as the son of immigrants. He knew the struggles of working people, the dignity of those who labor quietly, the pain of those who are often unseen. He never forgot where he came from, and that is why when people stood before him, he saw not strangers but reflections of his own journey, reflections of his father, his mother, his neighbors, his childhood. That is why his judgments carried warmth. They were rooted in empathy, in shared humanity, and that is what made him so beloved. I ask you tonight, how many judges can we name who are mourned by the common people as if they lost a family member? How many judges become legends, not for punishing the wicked, but for uplifting the struggling? How many judges have their courtrooms filled not with fear, but with love? Frank Caprio was one such man. He did not build monuments of stone, he built monuments in human hearts. And those monuments will never crumble. When I heard of his passing, I thought of the poor mother in Providence who once told him she could not pay her fine because she had to feed her children. And he said to her, "Your priority is your children. You are a good mother." Do you know how powerful those words are? In a society that often crushes the poor, those words were like light in darkness. She walked out of that courtroom not just free of a fine, but free of despair, uplifted with dignity. That was his gift. That was his greatness. I thought of the young black man who stood before him, ashamed, expecting harsh punishment. Judge Caprio looked at him not as a criminal, but as a young man who deserved another chance. And in giving him that chance, he told him, "I believe in you." My brothers and sisters, to believe in someone who has been abandoned by society is one of the greatest acts of love. Judge Caprio believed in people. He believed in humanity, and he reminded us all that justice without humanity is nothing but cruelty disguised. And so today, as I pay tribute, I want to say this clearly. Judge Frank Caprio was not just an American judge. He was a judge for humanity. He was a symbol of what justice should look like, whether in America, in Africa, in Asia, or anywhere in the world. He broke the chains of cold law and replaced them with bridges of mercy. He stood as a reminder that compassion is the highest form of justice. I know tonight many people across the world are grieving. They grieve not in one language, not in one country, not in one culture alone. They grieve in whispers, in prayers, in silence, and in tears. They grieve in church halls and mosques, in crowded cities and quiet villages, in places where Judge Caprio's name was well known, and even in places where people had only heard a single story about him. That is the power of a man whose life touched humanity itself. His passing has crossed every border, every boundary, every division. Black, white, rich, poor, immigrant, native-born, people everywhere feel this loss. That is not something we can say about many men. Too often, when leaders or judges pass away, only their own circle mourns. The powerful mourn their powerful friends, the rich mourn their wealthy companions, one community mourns its own. But Judge Caprio was not just a man of one circle, one class, one group. He belonged to everyone. His kindness made no distinction, so in death his grief makes no distinction. Think of it, my brothers and sisters. The poor man who once stood trembling in front of him will shed a tear tonight. The wealthy man who saw in him not favoritism but fairness will feel sorrow tonight. The immigrant mother who once feared the law but found mercy instead will remember him tonight. The child who once sat in that courtroom watching their parent receive dignity instead of humiliation will pray for him tonight. The student who watched clips of his judgments on television or online and felt inspired to study law with compassion will mourn him tonight. From Africa to America, from Asia to Europe, people who never even entered his courtroom will say, "The world has lost a good man." And that is the proof of his greatness. For greatness is not measured by wealth, or by titles, or by monuments. Greatness is measured by the number of hearts you touch, the number of lives you uplift, the number of people who feel emptiness when you are gone. And tonight, emptiness is felt everywhere. That is greatness. For when you die and people of all races and nations mourn you, you have truly lived a life of meaning. Think of how rare this is. Many men live and die unnoticed outside their own circle. Many leaders live with fame but die with bitterness, remembered only by their failures. But Judge Caprio is mourned across color, across creed, across borders, across oceans. When a black man in Africa, a white woman in Europe, a struggling immigrant in America, and a child in Asia all feel sorrow at your passing, then you know your life was more than personal, it was universal. You know you did not live only for yourself. You lived for humanity. Judge Caprio's life was meaningful. Every day he walked into that courtroom, he was writing a legacy. Not the kind written in dusty law books, but the kind written in human hearts. A legacy of kindness, a legacy of fairness, a legacy of justice with a human face. He could have chosen to be like so many others, cold, distant, harsh. He could have chosen to see only the law and not the person. But he chose meaning over power, compassion over cruelty, humanity over indifference. And because of that choice, his life was rich, not with possessions, but with purpose. His death is painful. Painful because we feel robbed of more years of his wisdom, more years of his compassion, more years of his presence in a world that so desperately needs men like him. Painful because when the world is drowning in injustice, losing a voice of mercy feels unbearable. Painful because though we are grateful for the years he gave, we always hope for more. And yet, though the pain is heavy, it is also proof of love. We do not grieve those who meant nothing to us. We grieve deeply because he meant so much, but his legacy is eternal. This, my brothers and sisters, is where the pain finds its healing. A man like Judge Caprio does not truly leave us. His body may rest, but his example walks on. His judgments live on in recordings that continue to inspire millions. His compassion lives on in the lives of those he lifted when they were falling. His kindness lives on in the children who saw it and will grow to repeat it. His fairness lives on in the young judges, the young lawyers, the young leaders who watched him and learned that justice without humanity is nothing. Eternal legacy means that even 50 years from now, even 100 years from now, someone will still tell his story. A young law student will still watch his judgments and say, "This is the kind of judge I want to be." A parent will still share a video of him with their child and say, "Look, this is what true compassion looks like." A leader will still be reminded that power is for service, not domination. And every time that happens, Judge Caprio lives again. So tonight, as we mourn, we must also rise. Rise with gratitude for the example he gave us. Rise with determination to continue his work. Rise with the awareness that his death is not the end, but a passing of the torch. The torch he carried so faithfully now rests in our hands. And if we, each in our own small way, show compassion where there is cruelty, mercy where there is harshness, dignity where there is humiliation, then his legacy will not just remain eternal, it will grow eternal. We know this was not just remain eternal, it will grow eternal. This, my brothers and sisters, is why Judge Frank Caprio's story will never fade, because his story is not just his, it is ours. It belongs to everyone who believes in justice touched with humanity. It belongs to everyone who believes that a judge can be a servant of compassion. It belongs to everyone who believes that greatness lies not in how much you rule, but in how much you love. And so I say again, many tonight are grieving from every walk of life, from every corner of the earth. But even in our grief, we find hope. Because if one man could touch so many lives in one lifetime, then surely we too can touch the lives around us. If one judge in one small courtroom could inspire the entire world, then surely the world can be changed, if only we choose to follow his example. Judge Caprio's life was meaningful, his death is painful, but his legacy, his eternal legacy, reminds us that humanity at its best is still possible. And I ask myself, what does his passing demand of us? It demands that we continue his mission. It demands that we carry his torch of compassion. It demands that in our homes, in our communities, in our nations, we remember that justice is not about punishing, but about uplifting. It demands that every leader, every judge, every politician, every soldier remembers that our first duty is to humanity. If Judge Caprio could do it in a small courtroom, then what excuse do we have standing with the power of nations in our hands? Brothers and sisters, forgive me if my voice trembles tonight. Forgive me if my words come with tears. But I want you to know, I am not ashamed to weep for this man. Because true strength is not in hiding emotions. True strength is in honoring those who deserve our love. And Frank Caprio deserves our love, our respect, our gratitude. I send my deepest condolences to his family, to his loved ones, to all those who are blessed to know him personally. And I say to them, you are not alone in this grief. The world weeps with you. Africa weeps with you. I weep with you. Because though he is gone from our eyes, he is not gone from our hearts. He lives in the laughter of every child he spared from hardship, in the relief of every mother he comforted, in the hope of every young man he lives in us. So tonight I ask you all to pause. Pause and reflect on the life of this great man. Pause and remember that humanity is fragile, life is short, and what gives life meaning is not wealth, not titles, not power, but the love we show to others, the justice we uphold, the compassion we spread. Judge Frank Caprio showed us that. He showed us the way. Rest in peace, Judge Caprio. The world is darker without you, but the light you lit will never be extinguished. Your compassion lives on, your justice lives on, and your legacy will continue to guide us. I, Ibrahim Traoré, bow my head tonight in your honor. May your soul rest in eternal peace.